And thank you. So it's great to see you all here this afternoon, and it's a particular honor and privilege for me to introduce Ruth Mitchell, who is I think we could say a colleague, since we're both interested in pediatrics and both involved in the top end of pediatrics, meaning the brain and the head. Myself as a developmental pediatrician, and Ruth as a neurosurgeon. And so it's great to have you join us, Ruth. And you haven't picked up too much of Australian twang yet, but I guess I know you were born and raised in Calgary. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. It's not nearly that simple. I'll give a summary of my confusing life.
Yeah, please do, because I'm always interested as to how people arrived at this juncture. So you'll have seen the bio in the advertising that Margritte and Leah distributed. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ruth, and we're going to be talking about our role as healthcare professionals, and how we can what we can do around the terrible situation that's happening in Ukraine. So over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor and a joy and a privilege to be here with you online at the moment. I want to begin by acknowledging humbly that I live and work on unceded sovereign territory of the Coast Salish people here in Vancouver, in British Columbia. And I want to acknowledge the ancestors from that community. And I also want to take a moment to make note of the fact that wherever they've been used and tested, where the nuclear weapons have disproportionately affected Indigenous communities. And we need to make a conscious decision as we do our work to be grounded in and informed by the stories of survivors from those communities. And so it is a real treat to be with you. I have a very mixed breed, I am. I was born and raised in Peru, in the mountains of Peru. I travel around with a pack of passports, but I travel mostly on a Canadian passport. My mother is Canadian from near Edmonton, and I did my undergraduate studies in Calgary. So I did live in Calgary for 7.5 years in all, actually, over a couple of periods. So I do call Canada home at least some of the time. I've done all of my medical school and my neurosurgery training, and my first round of working as a neurosurgeon in Australia. And so when we first envisioned what this talk would look like, we were thinking about having a bit of an introduction to the work of sort of what I've done, and to talk through the process of ICANN coming into being, because that was something that happened when I was a medical student. And so maybe there'll be another opportunity at some stage for me to take you through that story in detail. But my anti-nuclear journey started in earnest when I was a first-year medical student, when I got to go to the Congress of the World Congress of the IPPNW. And that year it was in Beijing, in China, in 2004. And it was in the years that followed that a small group of MAPW doctors, Medical Association for the Prevention of Wars, the Australian affiliate of IPPNW, IPPNW Canada's Australian sister. It's like Canadian, but more free range, I think, is probably the best way to explain it. The IPPNW affiliate in Australia sort of was the midwife, I think is the best way to think of it, that gave birth to and brought into the world what we now understand as a global campaign of ICANN. And so it's a real thrill to be able to think about the future with each of you, and think about what does the next wave, what does the next step in our work together for peace look like. And we come together at a time when, the reason why from when I first said, oh yes, I'd love to give a talk, to now we've had a big change in how we want to approach this, is obviously because we're in a changing world. And there have been some really dramatic things happen in the last month. And after sort of a lot of drum rattling and a lot of agitation, the sort of unthinkable has happened, and Russia has invaded Ukraine. And when you sit around all day, every day, thinking about the fact that the world is bristling with nuclear weapons, and when you've committed your life to doing as much as you can to dismantle that awful regime of nuclear weapons around the world, this sort of challenge hits different. And I know that each of you will be experiencing this in different ways, but I know that at least part of the journey for each of us as activists and campaigners is that people have taken an interest in the things we've been bleating on about for decades in a different way. And I know from our colleagues around the world that that's a real theme that's resonated. Recently, I read from Beatrice Finn, who is the executive director of ICANN and is based in Geneva. She's a Swedish woman, but she wrote about how, you know, on her social media platform, she's experienced a real uptick in the amount of people following her. And under ordinary circumstances, that would be delightful. But actually, it's because everyone is really keen to know more about nuclear weapons and the nuclear threat. And it's not because they've just decided it'd be fun to learn. It's because people are frightened. And because there's a real need to know, and there's a yearning for facts, a yearning for information, and a need for wisdom, and a need for action. So yesterday I touched base with the executive director of IPPNW based in Boston, and our program director as well. And I asked them, I said, I have this wonderful opportunity to speak to the excellent people of IPPNW Canada tomorrow, and I wonder what you wish they knew about what's happening around the world, and what is IPPNW doing? And I asked this as their chair. So I'm the chair of the Board of IPPNW now. I'm honored to be in that role. And in the 41 years that IPPNW has been in existence, I'm the first woman to be in that position. I know that we have some very esteemed senior former and present leaders of IPPNW with us here tonight. And I particularly want to acknowledge Mary Wynne Ashford, who I've been a huge fan of for a very long time. So it's an absolute honor to be with you, Mary Wynne. As I say, I'm a massive fan, and it's a wonderful thing, having been inspired by your work for a very long time, from when I was a medical student, to be able to connect with you in this space. And I think that's part of the magic of the work we get to do, is the connections, the way things get woven together over time. But we have a new challenge on our hands as a federation. And so many of you will know that IPPNW Canada is the Canadian affiliate of something that has over 60 affiliates around the world. So perhaps I can give you a bit of a sense of what's happening around the world and what other people are doing to respond to this challenge and this threat. But first of all, as I mentioned, I spoke to Michael and to Chuck, and they said that really they were both on the kind of the same page with this. There's a lot of things that IPPNW members and affiliates are doing around the world, but at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that there's nothing specific we can do to like forestall the conflict that is already happening in Ukraine. What we can do is that we can seize this moment, this opportunity, this openness, the fact that people want to talk about nuclear weapons, that they actually need facts and information about nuclear weapons, that they're seeking, that they're asking, that they're following, that they're Googling, that people are running stories that normally just you cannot get up in anything other than, you know, very progressive press, gives us this moment where we can actually get some messages across. And getting the message across that things are extraordinarily urgent, and that should we survive this encounter, this brush with disaster, the imperative for nuclear abolition and for accelerating the world to the work towards a nuclear weapons free world, that, you know, that there's never been a greater need. And I think that seizing that sense and getting that sense of the journey ahead and the direction this needs to take us in is so important. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what some of the people, some of what we're aware of around the world that's going on. So there, right before Russia moved into Ukraine, we released a really important report. And this was something that was done with the support of IPPNW, but was authored by ICANN. And this is a report which, if you haven't seen, is really worth a look. It's called No Place to Hide. So if you go on the ICANN website, it's going to be one of the top links that you can click through to. And the report, No Place to Hide, looks at cities in each of the 9 nuclear weapon states, and also looks at Berlin as an example of a big city, a capital city in a country which houses nuclear weapons of another state. So there's 10 cities for which they have modeled what would happen if an 100 kiloton nuclear weapon was detonated over the sort of middle of the city. And they've used modeling approaches which are available, software that is available to everyone. So in fact, they've both done a really important modeling exercise and given us the health information to go with that. So what would be the impact on the health infrastructure? How many doctors would be left to look after how many people? How many nurses would be left to look after how many people? What do we expect would be the reduction in the hospital capacity as the result of that sort of typical nuclear weapon? And tried to couch things in healthcare terms. And one of the other clever things they've done is they've compared it to the what we know about the surgeon capacity that has happened in the context of a global pandemic. And so because of a global pandemic, people now are able to understand what it is to overwhelm a health system in a way that they may not have been able to in the past, unless they themselves have experienced violent conflict or fled disaster. So for most people in the world, that's actually a relatively new idea, but it's something we've been talking about for a long time. So I commend that report to you because it has got lots of wonderful actual factual detail of really well worked out numbers. But the other thing is, because the methodology is contained within the paper, there's actually instructions. So if you wanted to replicate what they've done and do the same modeling exercise using the same software for a different city, I mean, let's say we wanted to do it for Ottawa, or you wanted to do it for Vancouver or for Toronto or whatever you want to do, that actually is something that becomes an option. So I think that's a really thought-provoking report. And so I got to do something I've never done before, which is an Instagram Live. So I feel very cool and very young, which I'm neither of those things anymore. I was never cool, but I was once young. And so I got to do an Instagram Live with Alicia, who is the research director who actually wrote the report. And that was really great because it meant that we could actually get a message out into a place that perhaps people weren't reading ICANN reports on Instagram, but now they have access to it, and to a conversation with a doctor about the health impacts of nuclear weapons. So that sort of thing has been really refreshing. So moving from that into then having this increase in the nuclear threat, because all of a sudden we've got a nuclear power invading a sovereign country, has made the uptake of that report's been very different than I think it would have been otherwise. It's ended up being very timely. So that's one thing to mention. There have been a number of sort of individual countries that have released individual reports on these issues, and that modeling was applied to Stockholm by SLMK. So SLMK are the Swedish affiliate. So they put out a report called "Prevention is the Only Medicine" very recently. And then there've been quite an important list of articles, and I'm able to send these on to Margrethe or to Leah if that's helpful to circulate, if you'd like, just some of these things that I'm mentioning. But Ira Helfand, who many of you may know, who has up till recently been an extraordinarily busy doctor, most of his career he worked in emergency medicine. He has recently retired from clinical work, which is great news for us because it means that now he's basically a full-time campaigner. And so he's almost like this silent extra staff person for the Boston office. And he just writes night and day and does media and stuff. So it's superb. So he wrote a piece on in Ukraine and the threat of nuclear war, linking those issues. The European IPPNW, so IPPNW obviously has a number of European affiliates. And what they do perhaps better than some of the other regions around the world is they actually have the sense of a region. And so I think, North America is always at a bit of a disadvantage because there's like literally 2 countries. So it's like, well, if these 2 affiliates are getting together and doing stuff, I guess that's a regional action. But it has a different feel in Europe where you've got multiple active, vibrant, different affiliates. And there's some giants. I mean, certainly IPPNW in Germany and MedAct in the UK have a long and very big tradition of doing a great deal of work, but there are a lot of others in that space too who work together, and together they're able to organize an appeal called No War in Europe, a medical appeal. So it was signed by like 500 doctors, prominent doctors from across Europe. So those are sorts of activities that have been taking place. Finland, you'll probably be aware, has a unique relationship when it comes to Russia and to NATO. It's sitting there in the middle. And so there's been some really eloquent writing from Kati Juva, who is a psychiatrist in Finland, who's tried to engage with that using a psychiatric lens as well as also the geopolitical side of things. And one of my favorite people in the world, Dr. Tilman Ruff, who has been around with ICANN from the very beginning, has been around in IPPNW certainly since long before I thought about a career in medicine. He's been writing prolifically as well. So one of the pieces he wrote recently was the Ukraine crisis could trigger a nuclear catastrophe. And he's now written a number of pieces, and remarkably one recently got picked up by the Murdoch Press, which you'll know is a really important thing to happen, because it shows that very conservative media sources all of a sudden very interested to hear and know they're going to get the clicks on a story about this. And so that's been really exciting. Now, another kind of medium that's been used to try and get some messages out is from our co-president, Carlos Umania, who is from Costa Rica, but at this point actually spent some of his time in Spain. And he's done a lot for the Latin America region, and he's actually, for IPPNW purposes, repatriated Spain to be part of the Latin America region. So it's a sort of decolonizing thing he's done, which I'm very impressed with, very impressed. So he sort of reclaimed Spain for Latin America. I thought that was overdue. I say this as someone who's born and raised in Peru. I'm very proud of him. But the language link is obviously very strong there. So he put out an actual video message. Instead of writing an article, he did a video message, and he did it in English and in Spanish. And then that's been circulated on various social media networks. So actually doing a video can be really effective if you have any kind of platform on which to share that. And just a short clip can be really effective. So that's some of the things that have been done. The IPPNW student movement, along with particularly the European student representatives, put out a statement about this from a medical student perspective. And so there have been quite a few different perspectives offered on this work. And so I'm happy to send those on to you so you have links to some of those. And the reality is things are happening so fast and turning over so quickly that in the last 3-4 days since I tried to put a list together, everything, there's more going on. I think, broadly speaking, there have been petitions. So there was a petition started by IPPNW to actually get people to sign an Avaz petition saying, no war, please. And then, having had a fair bit of trouble getting other people to buy into and share about this petition, Avaz themselves picked this up as a central petition. So if you go on the Avaz website, which is a 69 million members wide, kind of global activist space, there's actually a mainstream petition organized by themselves, by Avaz, which came after a day of discussions with IPPNW head office staff, after a serendipitous set of conversations. So now Avaz has taken this up as a core campaign, as core business, getting ordinary people to say, we don't want this war. Now, what difference does that make? I'm not always sure what difference a petition makes, but it does give people an ability to register their dissent. And it gives people an ability to bear witness and feel as though they have a voice. And I do think that is important. And there are times where the work we do as campaigners and as activists isn't so much thinking we're going to change the world today or tomorrow. It's actually about making gestures and making statements and having a position which says the world is not going to change me. And I am not going to fall into this trap of thinking that we can move forward with violence. I'm not going to fall into this trap of legitimizing weapons, whether of mass destruction or not. And so I do think it is significant, but it's also a way of raising awareness and letting people know the reason why it's so important to avoid an armed conflict is because of the escalation that can occur. And once again, to bring it back to that lens of the health impact. And I think when it comes down to it, what I'd like to move to after a few more comments from myself is I want to hear from all of you. What is it that you're seeing? What is it that you're thinking? And where is it that you think that you as an individual and we as a collective can have a voice, and particularly in Canada, what are the things that can be done and said? And as we think forward to that, I want to remind myself and you that the unique location we have in this discussion is we have the moral authority that comes from the bedside. We bear witness to illness and ill health from the most vulnerable places where humanity really unravels. And we are able to speak to the cost of conflict, the cost of war, in a way that really nobody else can. The lawyers can't do it, military people can't do it. We have a unique lens. And so remembering that our strongest voice of advocacy comes from the bedside, what are the unique messages that we can craft? What are the unique work that we can do to reconnect the violent, and difficult to understand conflict, halfway around the world to our everyday lives here and to the human cost of war? And what are the humane ways that we can highlight the risk of nuclear conflict, which is a very real risk, while not creating just mass panic? Because I feel we have a duty of care to engage with messages around this in a way that motivates people instead of paralyzing them. So, I mean, I've just asked some impossible questions, which is what I like to do. But, as I'm reminded, if you can undertake brain surgery, you can do hard things. And I think all of us in our different disciplines have taken on big challenges in our professional lives. And so we're equipped for the work of wrestling with difficult things. So without more ado, that's enough words out of my mouth for now. I'd love to hear from you. What are the things that you're thinking about? What are the actions you've already taken? What are the framings that you found helpful? And where can we go from here? I am listening and watching, and I will pick at people. I'm also able to respond if